Written Out. Written by Indigo Rose 50. Read by Arashi. The door to Hubert's office banged open. So few dared to enter without knocking, and even fewer entered with such dramatics, that Hubert did not bother picking his head up. "You're late, Felix," he greeted flatly. Felix responded with a single grunt. "Here," he snapped, as he held out a small pile of papers to Hubert. "And next time you need reports so badly, you can come get them from me yourself." "I will not." Hubert took the reports. As soon as they left his hand, Felix spun on his heel and made for the door. Odd. Normally he loved nothing more than bothering Hubert while he was working. "What's the matter?" Hubert called. Felix stopped in the doorway. "Nothing." "Is it because you can't find someone to spar with again? I can do so later this afternoon if you truly need an outfit for—" "I'm fine." "You're clearly not." Aiming a glare back at Hubert, Felix spat, "Shut up!" The shock of it did indeed shut Hubert up. He could only stare in silent confusion as Felix grumbled something and left the office, shutting the door firmly behind him. Very odd. Hubert frowned to himself as he straightened the newly acquired reports. Since becoming a mercenary under the patron of the Empire itself, Felix had regular meetings with Hubert to work out expenses and take on private missions. These meetings had occurred for years. Never in that time had Felix been so short with Hubert. On the contrary, Dorothea once pointed out that Felix got along better with Hubert than he did with some of the other members of the strike force, except perhaps Bernadetta. As long as Hubert had the cooperation of the best swordsman of their generation, he didn't worry much over the details. But it was hard to ignore how off-balance Felix's departure just now had left him. He tried to push it away, straightening the papers a third time, before picking up his quill. Hopefully, Felix could find a way to let off some steam before Hubert needed to speak with him again. Hubert went through each document methodically, taking note of the sums as he went. It was more productive to get lost in numbers than to dwell on Felix's temperament. Page after page Hubert went, deciphering Felix's handwriting with practiced ease. At last, he reached the final report. Hubert took a fortifying sip of coffee before holding up the paper to read. "Dear Hubert, Bernadetta suggested I write this down since she knows I'm not good with this kind of thing. She said it would be easier to get all my thoughts down on paper. But honestly, it just looks stupid when written out like this. Probably shouldn't start by talking about Bernadetta." Hubert slowly put down his mug. This was most definitely not a report. Yet it was addressed to him. He continued reading. "Dear Hubert, I'd like you and want to—" The last line was crossed out, yet still legible. Beside it, Hubert could make out the words, "Too childish," written in a quick scribble. Underneath it was, "Dear Hubert, I love you, I love you, I like you. Ask Bernadetta which sounds better. This is a waste of ink." The letter, such as it was, ended there, dotted with several blots of ink, suggesting Felix had hesitated with his quill posted over the paper more than once. Evidently, this was not a finished letter. Hubert hadn't been meant to see this. It must have gotten mixed in with Felix's reports somehow. Felix read it through a second time, then a third. He even held it up to the candlelight, just in case Felix was trying to get some secret message across. But to no avail. Sitting back in his chair, Hubert spread the unfinished letter on his desk and stared at it as if it were a chessboard. Whether Felix knew it or not, he had made the first move, which meant it was now Hubert's turn. It was hours later in the palace gardens when Hubert saw Felix again. Or, rather, he heard Felix, sounding more panicked than angry now. Hubert stopped before rounding the next corner, surveying the path ahead. There stood Felix, crowding Bernadetta against an archway, both looking equally flustered. "I have looked everywhere," Felix was saying. "You're sure it's not in your room?"
It's not!"
Bernadetta defended. Felix cursed. "This isn't the kind of thing you let float around a palace."
"But you said you didn't sign it, right? So if someone found it, they wouldn't know."
"His name is at the top," Felix snapped. "If someone finds it and brings it to him, he will recognize my handwriting." He suddenly glowered at Bernadetta. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't told me to write it, I wouldn't be in this mess.
Oh, come on! That's not fair!
Hubert had heard quite enough. Stepping around the corner as loudly as possible, Hubert approached the pair. They sprang apart. Bernadetta let out a squeak that she muffled with both hands over her mouth. Felix's face flashed with alarm, before falling into a scowl. There you are. Hubert held out the reports to Felix. I've been looking for you. These are ready for your review. Felix looked at the reports. Then the color drained from his face. Hubert almost laughed, as realization widened Felix's eyes. When Felix didn't move, Hubert pressed the papers into his chest, before nodding to Bernadetta, and stepping past them further into the gardens. He only went a few steps, before ducking behind a hedge to listen.
That was close,
Bernadetta said in a shrill whisper.
You don't think he heard us, do you? Felix? What's that?
When Felix didn't respond, Hubert allowed himself to smirk. He knew what had stolen Felix's voice. A paper, slipped behind all the reports. Dear Felix, would you like to have coffee with me sometime? Yours, Hubert. P.S. Do not be cross with Bernadetta. I think the letter was an excellent idea.